amazing.
It was wonderful.
Absolutely spectacular.
I've
It
watched
really-
it 3 times now.
I sent the link to my friend in Florida.
Yeah, it was fun. I'm working on, you need about 2 months to produce these things.
I'll bet.
Really.
Sure.
Colleagues, you have to agree upon what you're going to sing, then you have to have musical tracks made, then you have to do the video, and then all of that goes into it. And then finally, you have to edit it, which takes more time than the actual recording of the music.
And everything was in sync, the sound was incredible.
Exactly.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
Very proud of everybody.
Yeah, that was wonderful.
Yeah.
So I'm working on, I'm working on one for, let's see, I think it's towards the end of March, where I'm going to have some colleagues from around the country and some of our own, like Emma Mayer, who's now, I just got to watch her student recital at Hebrew Union College this last week, which was a great deal of fun because I've still been coaching her.
Sure.
And that was wonderful. So, yeah, we're going to do much more because we'll probably be here
Great.
for a while. But I will say I'm hopeful that the more vaccinations over these next months, that who knows, maybe we'll be able to be back in person sooner than we had even hoped. So we'll see.
Can I put a pitch in for one of your prior sessions?
Yes.
I really enjoyed the old cantors.
Yes.
That was just,
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
the sound was great. It was,
Yeah.
it would really help if you choose to do something like that again.
Sure.
If you give us some advance notice, because we can't always make it on every Monday. But I hate to
For
miss
sure. No, I know. Like, even though we're all pretty much homebound, life does interfere. We do have other things we
Yeah,
have.
it's very sad that things get in our way.
Yes, right?
When do you make your decision on the following Monday? Sunday or before that?
Well, it depends, actually. It really depends on what's going on at the temple, quite honestly. I try to plan things out a month in advance.
Whoa.
I try because depending on what I choose, sometimes it's 10 to 15 hours of preparation just for me to do the research,
Wow.
what music, what videos, what performances. Because when I did some of the Jewish, great Jewish tenors, and it's a lot of opera, I'll look at, 20, 30 video performances to decide which one do I really want, which is the best, which go together. So it's always 10 times the amount of time, at least, than the actual show itself, right? And for instance, sometimes it's timely and it's tied to the Torah portion of the week. So since I knew Lisa was doing the song, women's voices, I figured, well, I'll do something for Shirat Hayam on the Monday following, right? Next week, so sometimes it's Torah driven. Next Shabbat, this coming Shabbat, the Torah portion is Yitro, which contains the 10 Commandments. So there's a lot of stuff to pull from that. So sometimes I'll set them up 3 or 4 weeks in advance. And sometimes, like you said, Bill, it's Sunday afternoon.
Thank you, though.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah. So today is a little more of a homegrown show, in that no music videos, just a wonderful opportunity to teach and share with you one of the most beautiful Jewish musical traditions that exist. And again, that's from the Torah portion. So before I get into it, I just want to say we'll call attention. Today is the first day of Black History Month. Those are all the other things that help me decide things. So I think probably in 3 or 4 weeks, I'm going to do a Music Matters on the Black Jewish connection as seen through music, and you're gonna see some things that will dazzle you. There's a whole group of black cantors. Not kidding. It's astounding. That's just one of the pieces. Obviously, there's a lot more. And this past Shabbat morning was Shabbat Shira, the Sabbath of Song, and that's the first day of Jewish Music Month, right? So there'll be things that connect several of those elements together. So today, the oldest song in Jewish history, and we read it in this past week's Torah portion. It's the portion called Bishalach. And of course, we're right in the midst of the saga, the Exodus from Egypt, the drama, the plagues, and then the crossing of the sea, the miracle at the sea. And in a moment, I'm going to have our producer, Don Levy, put up some things on the screen for you to see. But I will share a few things about the Torah portion. Many scholars, Torah scholars, believe that this section of the Torah, this song at the sea, is the oldest fragment in the Torah. Oldest fragment in the Torah. Which means perhaps we're talking about 2500 BCE.
Wow.
That in fact the whole Torah itself may have been in response to and to continue the tradition of writing this scroll, our sacred history. And it all begins with music. All begins with a song, right? And the musical traditions that have been created over the centuries with respect to this Torah portion are beautiful and deep and meaningful. So, Don, if you will, we're going to take a look at what this ancient song, this ancient poem looks like in the actual Torah scroll. So, Don, if you will. So, these three columns you're looking at are all part of the Torah portion Bishalach. And you'll notice, of course, in the center column, you see this rather striking, compelling arrangement of words. It begins in that second paragraph and goes to the bottom of the page. We've discovered over the centuries that this was a prevalent poetic form, poetic structure in the Middle East, not only in the Jewish world. And it became known as the bricklayer's structure. Long line short, long line short, long line short, because of the way it looks. And it's important to note that the ancient Hebrew word for song, in fact to this day, is shir. Shir. S-H-I-R in English, shir, right? But it had a double meaning. And for the ancients, it meant one thing, right? It meant a poem. A shir is a poem. And they didn't need to distinguish or create another word for song because poems were sung. They were one and the same. They wouldn't read poetry, you would sing poetry. So this Shirat Hayam, the song at the sea, perhaps the oldest fragment in the Torah. A shir had a combined meaning, song, poem. A poem was sung. They were inseparable. Right? And in fact, the first phrase of the text is, Az yashir Moshe uvnei Yisrael et hashira hazod. And then Moses and the children of Israel sang this song, right? Or sang this poem, right? And the traditions of it, the musical traditions, are also old, and they're there's a variety. Okay, what I'm going to focus on with you today is the Ashkenazic tradition. There are Sephardic traditions, there are Middle Eastern traditions, but this is the Ashkenazic tradition, where, for all intents and purposes, over about 100-year span, synagogue music in the Western world was created, formed, solidified for all time. Right? So there is a special musical phrase that over the centuries became attached to this text. And it's used as a refrain. This little short little musical phrase is used over and over again throughout this text. And over time, that little melody was placed upon other parts of our liturgy. Okay? So over time, it became known not only as Shirat Hayam, the Song at the Sea, but also the Song of Journeys, because that melody became attached to our liturgy in moments where transitions, important transitions, could be transitions from one time of year to another. It could be a transition from one moment in time to another. And I'm going to demonstrate those moments, right, and how they function. Right? So first, the melody. Simple melody, and we know by its structure and its length and the range, it was probably created during our 1,000 years in Germany. It followed a very old and deeply embedded musical tradition within the German culture. And in German, it's called a leitmotif. I feel like I'm teaching a PhD course today.
It feels like it.
Right? So
Great.
the leitmotif, that's a German word that goes back to the medieval period. The ancient German troubadours, the Minnesingers, right? The Meistersingers, right? They were traveling singers, right? And many over time were actually Jews, I meant to say. So the leitmotif is a short melody. If you've ever come to know any of the operas of Wagner, okay? But there's a long history that precedes Wagner in Germany in this musical device. Short melody that would be repeated over and over and would be applied to certain words or certain texts, right? So that when you heard the melody, you knew what the subtext was, right? And we've talked about this, months ago when we first started doing our shows, right? How that whole tradition came to America in film scores, because most of our early film composers were German Jews. So when you hear, that's exactly right, Sue, Peter and the Wolf. How about something less? Bum 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 bum.
Yeah.
Simple group of notes, right? Short. Darth Vader. That whole tradition is German in heritage. That's the use of the leitmotif. Right? So in our tradition, which adopted this technique prominently in the Shirat Hayam, the Song at the Sea. So that melody is la 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 la. That's it. It's about 5 different pitches, a range of about less than an octave, and it's short. That's the leitmotif as it's used in Jewish liturgy, right? And there are several places in our liturgy where that melody is attached, in addition to the Shirat Hayam, which we'll get to in greater detail in a few moments. Here's one, and I mentioned Parashat Yitro, in which we have the 10 Commandments. There are places in the 10 Commandments when we reading that text and follow it, where we have this motif, right? Excuse me, not 10 Commandments, yes, but even more prominently in the days of creation. When we get to the end of each day of creation, the text is always Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Voker, Yom Echad. It was evening, it was morning, one day, and second day, and third day, and so on. What is the traditional melody? And this is, again, applied to Torah chant. Vayhi erev vayivoker yom echad. Lai, la, 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 la. That's the B section of the Shirat Hayam motif. Remember, it starts la 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 la. B section. La 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 la. So the Torah tradition of chanting the days of creation, that last phrase that says the day, it's Shirat Hayam. Now, we're not crossing the sea in Bereshit, in Genesis, but we are making a journey, an important transition, one day to the next day, right? Vayhi erev vayivoker yom sheni, and it was a second day, so on and so forth. Those are prominent moments in our Torah tradition where this Shirat Hayam motif is attached. In the Amidah, when we finish the first paragraph, Magen Avraham v'Ezrat Sarah, right? And we have this little phrase then inserted. And the words are determined by what time of year it is, right? So from the end of Sukkot, Shemini Atzeret, we include these words. Ma shiva ruach umori, Ma shiva ruach umorid hatal, or Ma shiva ruach umorid hagashem, rain. So the rainy season, fall, after Sukkot, through the spring. So that little phrase is inserted for the fall and winter months. And what's the melody? Ma shiva ruach umorid hagashem, part B of Shirat Hayam. It's an important moment of transition. Now it's about time of year, the seasons. On Passover first day, we chant this beautiful poem called Tal, which is dew, right? Dew. Same thing. Ma shiva ruach umorid hatal, because now we're switching into the spring season. So this melody became attached to moments of transition, times of season, right? All originating with the Shirat Hayam motif, right? Now let's take a look at the text. So, Don, if you'll put up the first slide.
Stand by, just one sec.
Standing by. And what we're going to take a look at is that actual poem segment. It's 21 verses designed in this bricklayer visual form. Now we're going to look at it line by line. You'll notice that certain lines are highlighted in yellow, okay? And that's for a reason. So the way it developed over time is that this Shirat Hayam melody was attached to specific phrases of the entire Shirat Hayam. Every phrase that has the name of God in it is sung to the special Shirat Hayam melody. If it doesn't have the name of God in it, it's chanted according to the trope, the normal Torah trope, right? So when one chants this parsha, you go in and out of the Shirat Hayam melody, and then smoothly back into Torah trope, and then back into the Shirat Hayam, right? So every phrase that has the name of God is sung in this beautiful Shirat Hayam melody. So if we look at the beginning, it starts with Az Yashir Moshe, and then Moses and Israel sang this song to God, right? So here's how we would start. Amen. Az Yashir Moshe Uvnei Yisrael et hashira azot ladonai vayomeru lemor. That's regular Torah trope. That was my mistake. Now, with the words Ashira ladonai, because there's the name of God for the first time. All right? Here we go. Ashira ladonai ki ga'o ga'a sus verokvo rama vayam, ozi vezimrat ya, vayihili lishua, ze eli v'yanvehu, Elohei avi va'arom menhu, Adonai ish milchama, Adonai shemo. Then immediately back into Torah trope. Markevot paro v'chelo yarav hayam umivchar shalishav tu v'yam suf. Right? And then we stay in Torah trope until we get to that next line, right? I can't see the first line for some reason because I have you in the gallery. Let me see if I can just move the text a little bit. What's that first word, you Hebrew readers? Yemincha Adonai nedari b'koach, Yemincha Adonai tiratz oyev, right? Aregonecha taros kamecha teshalach aronecha yochlemo kakash. And then the next slide. Okay. Avaruach apecha ner mumayim nismucho moned nozlim kafa uto mo berev yam. Oyev erdof asik achalek shalal timlahem onafshi ari karbi torishemo yadi. Samaveruchacha ki samo yam tsalaluka oferet b'mayim adirim. And then the text you all know. Here's where it appears in its original setting. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh, norat hilot osefele. That's where mi chamocha comes from. Okay? That line of mi chamocha. All right? Continues on in regular Torah trope, and we go to the next slide.
Natita Yemincha.
We're almost there. All the rest of this text until the end, right? By the way, you can see the trope signs on these words too, right? They're not so easy to see, but each one of those trope signs above and beneath the words, take a look at the first one line, which is Nivhalu alufe Edom, right? If you look at the word Nivhalu, there's a little hook above the last letter. Do you see it? Little hook above the last letter at the end of the word. That's a trope sign. It's called pashta, and it sounds like this. Pashta. Under the next word at the end, there's a little like backwards L. That's called a munach. And above the next word, you have two little dots. That's called katon. When you sing those trope patterns, it's pashta munach katon. That's why anyone who knows trope can look at a Torah text and sight read it. Not only the Hebrew, but sing it. Because all those trope signs, that's a symbolic musical notation.
That they don't put in the Torah.
Not in the Torah. It has to be in an edited version of the Torah.
No vowels,
No vowels, no trope.
no punctuation,
No punctuation.
no trope.
That's exactly right. Which means you're expected to memorize it, pretty much, right? But the music is an aid to memory. Once you learn how to sing it, it's not hard, right? And it's supposed to be when we chant Torah, every word must be pronounced correctly, but so is the phrasing and the grammar, and that's what trope does. Trope has multiple functions. First, correct pronunciation of every Hebrew word with the right accent. First and foremost, trope is our accent markings. Whatever syllable that trope sign is either above or beneath, that's the syllable that gets the accent. So they're accent markings. Secondly, they're phrase markings. Certain trope patterns go together in phrases. right? So that it makes sense. Az nivalu alofei Edom, ele Moav, yochazemo ra'ad, namogu kol yoshvei Chanaan. It teaches you how to group the words together so that they make sense. And lastly, the Torah must be sung because singing is the highest form of praise to God. And if we sing our prayers, my goodness, we have to sing the Torah, right? So that's the function of trope, right? And when we sing through this this little section, right? Az nivalu alufei Edom ele Moav yochazemo ra'ad namogu kol yoshvei Chanaan tipol aleihem emata v'fachad bigdol zeroacha yidmu ka'aven. Oh, I missed one. I'm sorry. This is my fault, right? This next phrase should have been highlighted. Ad yavor amcha Adonai. There's the name of God. Ad yavor amzu kanita. Tivlaem ovetita emno behar nachalatcha. Machon shitecha pa'alta Adonai. Mikdash Adonai kolonu yadecha. Adonai imloch leolam va'ed. Right. The last line of the page, also, these are my mistakes, by the way, also is chanted in the Shirat Hayam melody. Let's see. Shiru Adonai. We'll sing to God. Tiga oga sus verokvo rama vayam. And it ends the actual shir right there, right? Shiru Adonai. We'll sing to God. Right? So it's a beautiful and deep and brilliant tradition in the Ashkenazic tradition, right? When we chant this section, the entire congregation is asked to stand and bear witness, just as we did at the sea. We didn't sit at the shores of the sea, we all stood and sang this song. And when is this song sung? After we've crossed the sea to freedom, not before. Now we're rejoicing, right? And we're singing our gratitude to God, right? So what have we learned? A poem in ancient texts in Judaism is a song. They're the same thing. Poems were sung, right? I think about some of the monumental poetic works of Homer, right? The Odyssey, the Iliad, the Aeneid. Those poems were performance pieces. They were to be delivered like a play in public, right? The ancient Greeks had this tradition as well. So here it is in our tradition. So when we get to that aliyah in which the Shirat Hayam is sung, we ask the congregation to rise for the Song of the Sea, right? And we sing it in this beautiful, beautiful tradition, right? And we have a similar thing this coming Shabbat when we read the Ten Commandments. We ask the congregation to stand, bearing witness as if they're, in this moment, we're receiving the commandments at Sinai. Right? So that particular musical device, the leitmotif, is seen throughout traditional Jewish, synagogue music. Okay, when we did our shows about the high holidays and those motifs that attach themselves to certain moments, certain ideas, right? We learned that when you hear the phrase, Alleluia, kingship of God. So not only is that German traditional musical device seen and heard here at Shirat Hayam, it's throughout our Jewish liturgy, right? So it's just a fascinating and rich musical, liturgical tradition. And I should just demonstrate the Sephardic tradition. Spanish Portuguese is very different. they sing, the congregation sings the entire text to this repeated melody, right? Az yashir Moshe v'bnei Yisrael el hashira azot vayomeru lemor ay 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 over and over and over again, right? There's a traditional table song that's like, you know, our Birkat Hamazon called Bendigamos. It's sung in Ladino, and it uses the same melody they use for Shirat Hayam. So they have a similar tradition in that it is this repeated melody, but they sing the whole text to it rather than just isolated phrases, right? Or phrases that have the name of God in it. And, you know, other communities, depending on where they are, they have their own, you know, old traditions for this. But since ours is the Ashkenazic tradition, that's the focus for us today. Right? So let's
John,
open up.
John?
Yes, Bill.
I have a very elementary question. I apologize. How can we have both the words Lord and God? Do they translate differently?
Yes, they do, depending on who's doing the translating. So if you see, you know, Adonai spelled Yud-He Vav-He, right?
Yes.
Known as the Tetragrammaton, right? Those are letters that are just symbols for the actual name of God, which no one knows and therefore can't pronounce. And in fact, we don't read it out loud as Yehovah, but Christians do, because whoever created that name did not know of the tradition that we don't read that name. We don't pronounce that name, right? It's just Adonai. There are other versions of the name of God in this text which are spelled Aleph Daled Nun, Adonai, right? So there's a distinction made here between the spelling Yud He Vav He, right, and Adonai. That's one. Translating the Torah into English also affected the way they translated certain words, because sometimes instead of saying, "O Lord my God," right, it kind of sounded awkward to say, "O Lord my Lord." So for sometimes the phrases, they replaced it with Lord. Really depends on the individual translation, and there are many, many. That phrase, Adonai Yimloch Le'elam Va'ed, there, right, it's, you know, the Lord. More often than not, when it's spelled with Aleph Daled Nun, it's translated as Lord. For instance, our very popular, well-known song, poem that we sing at the end of services, Adon Olam, you'll always see it translated as Lord of the universe, as opposed to God of the universe. But in contemporary translations, they've decided, you know, we don't like the word Lord because that's too masculine, it's too male, so it's just God, right? Which, I mean, personally, I'm totally fine with, right? But that's a great question, Bill, because you see it all the time in our prayers, in the Torah texts, right?
I have another strange question.
There are only strange answers.
Well, that helps my strange question. Why, during certain holidays, are melodies of everyday music that we know, why are some of the melodies changed? Or even like during high holidays,
Yeah.
the Torah or the Haftorah blessing changed.
Two great questions. Boy, you guys know how happy I am when you're asking me these questions. The first thing, why do so many of our songs nowadays in temple sound just, you know, like pop songs?
Right.
Because they are.
Okay.
Because over time, and this is the result of Reform Judaism. We have to own it, for the better and for the worse. because over time what it's done, it has, for the most part, it has replaced, if not obliterated, our musical traditions. Okay? Now, truth be told, look, even in the 19th century, when the great Solomon Zulzer came on the scene, and Lewandowski, they started composing new music for the synagogue too. And what did it sound like? It sounded like Felix Mendelssohn and Schubert. The difference is they chose some of the greatest composers who ever lived to, emulate. In America, we write a lot of our music that sounds like music for teens, music since the 1960s.
But Cantor,
A lot of pressure. I'm sorry?
I was just going to say, when they mimicked Mendelssohn and Schubert, was that considered pop music in that era?
That's a great question. And I would say to some extent,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because
It was familiar. People, they felt comfortable with it because it was familiar, same as we feel with the pop songs.
absolutely. I think that's a very fair and accurate comparison. It's not like they had, I'm sure they had their folk music as well. They did. But to hear music in person, which is the only way to experience it, where would you go? Symphony Hall, the opera, right? That's where music was made. Now, of course, there was music in the taverns and in the bars, right? That happened too. And some of the tunes that Schubert and others latched onto were probably, just folk melodies also, right? You might have heard sung in a bar, right? So in a certain way, the comparison is fair, right? Having to do with its commonality among the people. It's not the same in terms of the quality of the music, right? It's a big difference. It went from high art to pop music, and this, you can't live in defiance of culture. I mean, you can, right? If you're in an Orthodox shul, you can't play instruments, right? And you're forbidden to introduce foreign elements, even though some of them do anyway, right? So we don't have those restrictions in Reform Judaism, and there is a huge upside to that in terms of creativity and remaining relevant to your members, right? And musical language is a very powerful tool. What we've lost is that we've preserved, I'm not referring specifically to worship of our temple, but what the amount of it that we have preserved, right, is a very tiny percentage now. Week to week on Shabbat, you hear all kinds of, it's just, whatever the guitar slinging rabbi composed that week. And none of it really is designed to sustain or to become part of a fixed musical language that could be shared from synagogue to synagogue. So Reform movement, you could choose any 15 Reform temples anywhere in America, and you will probably hear, you'll hear a handful of similar, whatever the most popular pop songs of the synagogue are. You might hear some of those, but by and large, you'll hear very little of the same music from synagogue to synagogue. So there's freedom, but there's also at the same time a complete destruction of Jewish music unity from synagogue to synagogue.
I get the feeling that that kind of breaks your heart. I've heard you talk about this enough times to feel that it strikes a chord. Pardon the pun.
Yeah, right. It does, because it is one of our most beautiful and powerful ancient traditions. And by the way, I'm not suggesting that we stop composing new music for the synagogue. that would be the death also of synagogue music in its own way.
But it's different. If I mean, I listen to Wilshire Boulevard Temple every week, and then I listen to other congregations, even my congregation here.
Yeah.
And what I hear at Wilshire for my whole life, it's exciting to listen to, whereas what I hear here is the same every week, and it doesn't become spiritual anymore.
Well, so that's two things at work. What's familiar and beloved to you for a lifetime at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, that's a very powerful thing that really can't be replaced by anything. The other piece of it is maybe the cantor there is, if there is a trained cantor, not doing what they should be doing, quite honestly. Or it could be the fact that the rabbi there is telling the cantor what he or she is going to sing.
Yes.
I mean, just being honest, okay? We don't have
all of the above, but it's just
That's exactly right. Or all
and
of
and I also believe that that's the culture of younger congregations. What they're looking for that's going to make
the
them
same
happy.
attachment that you have, right? But cantors have another responsibility. That would be like, to me, that's like the rabbi saying, you know, people are so tired and they really don't care to hear, you know, the Torah read or whatever. I mean, we're going to, you know, I'm thinking about maybe,
Oops, sorry.
I'm thinking about maybe we wrap the Torah this week. You know, maybe we had a beat to it, right? That to me is really no different, because who makes a decision like that? You know, only somebody who has no reverence, no respect for a sacred tradition.
Right.
I agree.
Right? Music is a little more elusive than that, because, you know, there are lots of really lovely melodies, and I sing a lot of them all the time at services that I look at and I choose and I try to think, well, is this worthy, right? And I choose based on that, but it's a highly subjective process. You know, I'm making the decisions, but I'm the cantor, and I have to make those decisions, right? I'm not going to find a new piece of music and send it to the congregation and let's take a vote.
We're spoiled.
Everyone has different tastes in these matters, but any serious cantor must ask that first question, right? Is this good for the tradition? Is this respectful? What will it mean going forward? You know, I think those are all things we have to at least give some consideration to, right?
There is Miriam. You see me?
Yes, I can. I can see
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Cantor. I just want to express a feeling of an older woman, very much older, and I think it's a conflict that will not be resolved, and I think it's a conflict that will always be with us, and that's okay. When I go to shul, I remember my Brooklyn Ashkenazi melodies very, very well. They're still with me. Eitz Chaim Hina Machazikim Ba, and then we go into that whole beautiful melody, which to me is very beautiful. I barely hear it at any synagogue that I'm in, whether it's Reform, Orthodox, which I go occasionally, and conservative. I personally decided in my head that I'm comfortable with all the melodies, because that's what I have to do. It isn't that I miss it, that I'm nostalgic. That's too bad about me. There are so many young people, they're hearing all these melodies. I love music in its entirety. When I was a kid, I was only 15, and I heard Bartok, and I heard Schoenberg, and I loved them. I loved the channel music. I didn't have to get used to it. It was right with me, right inside of me. So I love all music.
Yes, yes.
And so I think the conflict will always be with us.
Yeah,
And that's okay.
I know that you're right, because that's how it's been for a long time, and that is human nature, and it will always be there. I agree with you. It will continue going forward. So cantors, those who make these decisions, have to, weigh all of those things, right? What is important to preserve, and where is it really important to be creative and create new? And then at the end of the day, the real important decisions are, how do I weave this all together in a way that makes it compelling, right? And not jarring, right? And that's when it comes down to the artistry and the skill of the cantor. Because, you could sing a very simple, mundane melody, but if it's attached to certain sacred words, it's presented in such a way. Look, it wasn't Mahler, it was a simple folk tune, but I was so moved by it. That has to do with presentation and performance. So all of those things come into play. I agree with everything you said. Because, look, I grew up in a big conservative synagogue. There are a lot of those melodies and not just songs, but even the traditional davening style that, I can't say that I, long to return to. I love the synthesis of a variety of these traditions, right? So it's fascinating, right? Yeah. It is. It's always interesting, that to be sure. And look, these days we're also faced with another challenge, and that is, since we're all online, because I listen to services from synagogues all over the country, in my spare time. And, you hear all kinds of stuff, all kinds of levels of performance and quality. And, it's part of the challenge there is, I see a lot of people doing what amount to just a series of music videos, right? And so you have a whole new audience, because there are a lot of people out there, a variety of ages, who are really enjoying watching services online. You get to see a either poorly made or really well-made music video as part of services now, right? I can tell you personally, I suggested to the rest of our team at Wilshire, this is about 4 years ago, that we should start live streaming our Friday night services. And look, there are plenty of younger people on the staff than me, right? And they kind of looked at me like I was, what are you talking about? What does that mean? And I had already started watching Central Synagogue in New York, because they've been live streaming their services for almost 10 years, their Friday night services. And then
Wow.
10 years. And the senior rabbi who first came there as cantor was a former student of mine in the cantorial program at HUC. And she started doing this, and I talked with her about it numerous times, and I said, God, I'm going to try to do this here. And, they looked at me like I was out of my mind. And now here we are, a few years later. And because part of their fear was, well, if you do that, then who's going to come to temple? I said, many more people, because they're going to become aware of it. And when they can't come to temple, they're going to watch it. You're only going to increase the number of people who watch the services.
That's
Because
right.
people do crave being together.
Yes.
It's a gathering. It's a social event. But what about all the other people who either, for a variety of reasons, can't get there? Let's say you work till 5:30 on Friday, and you live on 6th Street in Santa Monica. You can't get to services. That's an hour ride. Or what if you live in, wherever, and you can't get to it's just impossible on a Friday in Los Angeles. You get to watch it online. You're part of this.
When
community.
Wilshire started live streaming services years ago, I started watching them because that's what I really
building lives-
I missed.
Right.
and especially for high holidays.
Yeah.
I can't run back and forth to
Yeah.
LA every weekend. Wish I could, but it's not
Well,
possible. But that was the serve, and I, because I have friends that are rabbis or cantors, and I have family that are rabbis or cantors, I find myself watching so many services on Friday night because of the time change. I can do it, seeing everybody, but being part of that community.
it's a remarkable opportunity for any synagogue now, right?
It really is.
It's good. It's good for Jews. I can
Yes.
watch the service of any temple anywhere. I don't have to become a member. It doesn't cost me anything, right? So it's an extraordinary opportunity, and it's transforming how synagogues function, and some of these changes we don't know how many we'll continue with, but we're going to continue with plenty, you know, because we have this available to us, right? How we got onto that topic from Shira?
Because I asked a stupid question.
Of course, there you go. Yeah.
I have a more stupid question,
Yes.
and it's not actually related to the music, it's related to the text. Looking at the text of this, I'm surprised that it's not in the Torah closer to Passover. I mean, we're talking about Exodus here.
Great.
So how does that happen?
It happens this way because for all of our festivals, Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, the three main festivals, and some other ones as well, obviously the high holidays, right? The normal Torah reading cycle is put on hold, and the sages in ancient times chose, the rabbis really of the Talmud, they chose on those holidays to read from the Torah the sections that pertain to that holiday. So it's out of the Torah reading sequence, right? Parasha by parasha, right? So when Passover comes around, you know, we're in the book of Leviticus, right? We're not at the crossing of the sea, right? But what do the sages decide? On Passover, you are going to read this section of the Torah. So the Shirat Hayam is repeated again during the Torah reading
I see.
during Passover, right? Yeah, exactly that. And high holidays as well. They chose special portions to be read on Rosh Hashanah, right? We're reading, it's all about the prelude to the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. So, right, we're back to different sections. Shavuot, same thing. Sukkot, same thing. Special portions were designated to be chanted on each of the major festivals that interrupt the normal Torah reading cycle. Right, so Shirat Hayam gets 2 performances a year.
Got it.
On Bishalach, and again Passover. Right?
Don Gurney,
Yes.
I loved what you just said, that we defer from our regular Torah readings and we read those parshiot that contain and are very, very in sync with exactly what the holiday is. And for that, I will always be grateful for the wonderful Haftarah we read on Yom Kippur. It's from Yeshayahu. I think have any moment, even today, to open the Tanakh and go to that Haftarah of Yeshayahu.
Yeah, it's powerful.
In it, he says, it sounds like an agenda for a 21st meeting of equity among people, etc. It could not be more modern, because God says to his people, don't tear your garments, don't sit on the floor, don't sit in ashes, but this is what you have to do. You have to feed the hungry, etc., etc. And it is such a magnificent one. I'm so glad you mentioned it. I personally thank you.
Yeah. And of course, in the afternoon of Yom Kippur, we chant the entire book of Jonah, which is a very deep and complicated text as well. So I decided that before we go today, I'm going to sing a piece for you all live. And it's a beautiful composition, a contemporary composition set to the text of Shirat Hayam in both Hebrew and English. And here's what's, to me, why I love this piece. It was composed by a rabbi, Corey Weiss, very talented young man who, of course, born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, where all great Jewish things come from.
Yay.
Or no, I wouldn't. Now where all good Jewish things come, but whatever Jewish things come from Cleveland are great. Put it that way. Risa knows this, right? But he's a really talented musician, and this piece is so special to me because it's a contemporary piece. It's going to sound to you pretty much at times like it was composed for, the musical Joseph, right? But it's not. But the whole piece is musically constructed on the traditional melody for Shirat Hayam. All of it. Right? Are you ready for this?
Yes.
Oh, boy, I haven't sung live in such a long time. Here we go. Ashira l'Adonai ki ga'ol ga'a sus v'rokvo rama vayam. God chose Moses to lead us to freedom, enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. You must convince Pharaoh to free my people. They've shown faith in me through their sweat and their tears. I will sing to the Lord a song of rejoicing. Now let all be free to sing with joy. Bichamocha v'elim Adonai, bichamocha nedar b'kodesh, norat tehilot, osefele, osefele. Ozi v'zimrat Yah, vayhelil Yeshua, Zeri v'yanvehu, Elohei avi v'haromemenu. God hardened the heart of the Pharaoh of Egypt. 10 plagues came down at Moses' command. The people of Egypt cried out to their Pharaoh, till at last he proclaimed, "Get out of my land." I will sing to the Lord a song of deliverance. Now let all be free to sing with joy. Bichamocha b'elim Adonai, bichamocha nedar b'kodesh, norat tehilot, osefele, osefele. Yemincha Adonai nedari b'koach, Yemincha Adonai tiratz oyev. Moses hurried to flee Pharaoh's army. God parted the sea. The waters divided, they reached the shore safely. They danced and they sang, "Thank God we are free." I will sing to the Lord a song of redemption. Now let all be free to sing with joy. Bichamocha b'elim kamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar ba'kodesh. Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, le'olam va'ed. Ashira l'Adonai.
Beautiful.
So there's a little contemporary off-Broadway version of Shirat Hayam. And to me, it's a wonderful, we talk about how do we blend the tradition with contemporary together,
You've got mail.
right? There's a wonderful example. The whole piece is based on Shirat Hayam, but the way he's dressed it, right? Contemporary harmony, contemporary rhythm, Hebrew, English, and all based on this ancient tradition. That would be a model for other young composers, I believe, when it comes to writing certain things for the synagogue. When a text or a prayer has an ancient musical tradition, I would like to see and encourage young composers to use that musical tradition, right? But dress it in your own way, right? So there it is. We kick off Jewish Music Month. Song at the Sea, the oldest Jewish song ever written, right? And all of its, all the ways that it has impacted, our synagogue music over the many centuries, right? So next week, it's also a week from today, I'm leaning towards something about the Ten Commandments. We'll see what I come up with. Of course, next weekend is also, don't tell this one, it's Valentine's Day. So not that we're going to observe or celebrate that, but I'm pretty sure Rabbi Nanis and I are going to offer a special musical Shabbat, right? A Salon Shabbat. And the focus is going to be on love through a Jewish lens. Many of our prayers are explicitly about love. V'ahavta, you shall love the Lord your God. Ahavat olam, right? With eternal love you have blessed us, God. And then there's human love and romantic love as seen through a Jewish lens. So that's going to be our Salon Shabbat on February 12th, right? And we'll go from there. So I hope you all can join in all of those experiences. And in the meantime, stay well. I got vaccine number 1 about a week and a half ago.
Great.
You got 2? Yeah. Spent 6.5 hours at Dodger Stadium. That was wonderful. 6.5 hours, and I didn't even see a baseball game.
Right. I think they got the line down.
I could have seen a doubleheader for that amount.
Yeah.
We get number 2 tomorrow.
Oh, you do? Good. I'll get mine in probably about 2.5 weeks or so.
Yeah.
I get my first one this week.
I talked to somebody today who had number 2, a young girl, and she said, make sure you have Tylenol, extra strength, and PM because it could really lay you low. And she was a young girl, so I just passed that along.
Yeah, our doctor has us, he sends out emails every day as to what to do and how to do it. And so we've got this whole list on the refrigerator ready to go. So